All right, let's try this again. So Yolmar should be in here soon. There we go.
Hello. Okay, here I am. I was lost for a
Yeah,
second. I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
yeah, I hear lost in cyberspace, but I'm glad we were able to find you.
Yes, I finally showed up.
Yes, yes, yes. How's your day going so far, Yomar?
It's been well, busy, but exciting, nerve-wracking.
Nerve-wracking. Okay. We'll see how much that lasts during this live.
Let's see.
Got a couple more people joining. Yeah, we had to restart, so
Yeah, sorry about
no
that.
issues. No, it's all good. Um, I'm not gonna talk bad about Instagram, so we don't get booted off. I'll talk about it offline. I want to get in trouble.
I feel
Yeah,
like
I just really wish that.
hold on. I feel like there. That's better.
I gotta get the
You
angles.
know, I was like, can I put it on top of my screen to get the right angle? I feel like this bottom angle, it is this one is not. It's not cute.
That's not the good side. Oh man, yeah, I had to get my little baby hair brushes. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be ready for
See?
them. Okay,
And now the phone is
I don't know
failing.
what to do.
And now that's why I
Yeah,
wanted to use my desktop because my camera's at the top. So I'm like, okay, we're good. No.
no, man, they don't want you to be great. I won't say who they are, but they don't want you to be great. Again, I don't want to get in trouble. All right, we got a couple more people in here. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so I'll start with introductions. So I'll introduce myself to you all who are not familiar with me. My name is Ulrick J. Accime. I'm an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker out of South Florida. My main population is adult males with anxiety and depression. So I've been in private practice since 2019, but have been in the field since 2014. And it's been an amazing ride being able to work with the community a little bit more intimately, doing individuals. With no further ado, let me introduce Yomar. Let the people know who you are.
So I'm Yolmar. I am a registered clinical social work intern. I'm a recent graduate. Well, kind of recent. To me, it seems like it's recent. I graduated in December 2020, and I have been working in a private practice for about a year. My specialty is trauma. So I work with teens of ages 14 and above, and adults, males and females, through any type of traumas that they have. Um, like I said, I've been doing it for about a year, but I've also worked with victims of domestic violence. I've worked with victims of crime. I've worked with people who suffer from schizophrenia, bipolar, major depressive disorder, things like that. So I've just found out that I really love working with people who have experienced trauma and trying to help them understand what's going on.
Now, I'm out here very proud of you over here, man. You very strong over here. I see you.
Yes,
I
me
have to
and
let
Jay
them know.
graduated from Barry, Barry University. So very, very
Yeah,
proud
just
of
a little quick plug.
it. Yes.
Yeah. So as I was thinking about this topic, I believe this, I think stress management or some sort of awareness month happens this month in involving trauma, stress, anxiety. So I wanted to pay homage to that and discuss this topic. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, I don't think there's any person better that I know than you, Yolmar. Being a vet yourself, I'm plugging that, right?
Yes,
So your
100%.
experience working with
Thank you.
you're a soldier. Oh man. And then also working with victims of domestic violence, sometimes perpetrators as well, right? Or no?
Sometimes it depends, but mostly it's for the people who have been victims of domestic violence, either still yes, Army Strong, I saw that. In the relationship, or are already out of the relationship.
Okay, got you. So, you've seen it in various ways. Seen it with working with the adolescents, working with the adults, and how it affects even family systems. Because I think you also work with maybe not in the family group setting, but you might work with siblings and parents and the children to some extent, right? So you see how prevalent the trauma can be in someone's life.
Yeah, so even when you have, for example, a teenager who's 15 or 16 and has gone through a lot of childhood trauma when they were in their younger years, you still have to make room for family sessions so that the parents can understand how the trauma affected the child, or whatever, if it's a child that was maybe lived with grandparents for some time and then they're back with parents, it's important for the parents to make the connection that maybe whatever happened with the grandparents, affected the child. So there is room for family sessions. There's room for individuals, also couples, right? So that couples
Mm.
understand how trauma has affected the other person as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's wonderful. So you out here just doing it.
trying
Um,
trying my best.
okay, okay. So, someone sent it a question. I don't want to forget it.
Okay.
So, Jean Rivera asked, how many sessions on average does it take to see progress? What would you say?
Oof, that's a tough question. So it depends on the type of trauma, how long the person endured trauma, and also the person's willingness.
Mm,
Sometimes we can get very comfortable in those roles, so it can take a lot of work from an interpersonal perspective to be able to change that. So I can't ask someone to change what they consider part of their identity if they don't know what else they could be, right? So if you have
yeah,
someone, for example, who was human trafficked and
yeah.
they were trafficked for a long time, they may have developed an identity around I'm good for I'm a sexual object, and if I'm not that, then what am I? So a lot of times really
Mm.
is a lot of what the person is willing to let go of so that it can be replaced with something better.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, great question, Jane. I would say, just to piggyback off of Yomar, really depends on the client. There's some individuals I work with, and it may be 3 months that I'm working with them, and we're getting straight to it.
Yep.
We're getting into the work. They're doing their homework. They're having sessions that are subsequent. So they're not skipping weeks and things of that nature. They're showing up on time. They're very invested. They're doing the outside work as well. And they're also in an environment that is conducive to their healing. So they're not maybe exposed to the trauma on a daily basis. So they have time to heal some of the wounds that come from dealing with some of the trauma that they deal with. And then you have individuals that, as Yomar discussed, that have years of the trauma and maybe even experiencing the trauma on a daily basis. So it's really hard to get the person sort of disattached from the trauma that they may have experienced for that prolonged period of time.
Yeah.
So that work might take a bit longer.
Yeah, it's like layers. You have to start, sometimes you have to start if they have childhood trauma and then that translated into them being abusive relationships. Now you have to go back to the childhood, then the abusive relationship, and then what they want to do now and what they want to do moving forward. So it's all depending on
It's all dependent. Yep, yep. All right. So the first question we have is, how would we describe trauma? How would you describe trauma, Yolmar?
So, from my experience, trauma is anything that makes us go through like very stressful, scary, distressing events. It can be emotionally distressful to the person when they think about it. So trauma, when people hear trauma, most people think of some type of sexual trauma, or like a huge car accident, or something like extremely traumatic. But trauma can also be losing someone who was very dear and near to you. Trauma can be going through a divorce. Divorces can be traumatic for some people. So any type of event that causes you an extreme emotional distress can be considered trauma.
Excellent. Yeah. So there's just different sorts of traumas, different categories. So we have acute, we have chronic, and we have complex, typically, right,
Yeah.
Yomar?
Right. So acute is basically like one single event. Like if someone
Okay.
was robbed at a gunpoint one night, and it only happened that one time to them, that can be considered acute. Chronic trauma is more repeated, prolonged, like domestic violence abuse.
hmm
Complex trauma is exposure to multiple traumatic events, like childhood trauma can be very complex. If you experience trauma from a young age, all the way till you were a teenager, that would be more like complex trauma. And it could be physical abuse, it could be neglect, it could be sexual abuse, anything like that.
Okay, we have Mara. Mara joined the live just now. Barry in the house. Barry in the house.
Okay.
So, how would you say trauma affects people?
Well, different ways. So when we go through a traumatic event, there's a lot of things that go on internally in our brain and our bodies in order for us to kind of process the trauma. So what happens is we have our amygdala, that is our emotion center in our brain, right? So our emotional center is the one that sends signals when it sees something scary, when it sees something like that's going to cause you panic, something that may mean that lets you know that you're in danger. When you realize that you're in danger, your amygdala goes off and it sends signals to your nervous system. Your nervous system then starts to act all wacky because it doesn't know what's going on, and then it tells your body, hey, we need to get ready to fight, flight, or freeze, right? Those are usually the three
Mm,
responses that we
yes.
have. We either are going to fight back, we're going to run away, or we're going to just freeze and play dead. So once our body goes through that, it shoots up adrenaline and cortisol, which is the stress hormone, all over our body so that we can prepare for one of those actions. Once
Yep.
all of that is going, what happens is that our muscles start to tense up. We feel like we can't breathe. We feel like we can get headaches. Our blood pressure rises. Our heart starts to beat really fast. All of that happens within about half of a second,
Yep.
right? So what happens is that when we go through a traumatic event, that memory is stored in the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is emotional, and it attaches the stressful memories to events. So that's why when we get triggered, the amygdala is like, hey, we've been through this before. We need to do something to protect ourselves. So we need to get ready to fight, freeze, or hide all over again. And then we feel those symptoms all over again, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's one part of it. And it also affects, so a lot of people have trouble remembering traumatic events, right? You hear people,
Yep.
victims of abuse and things like that. You hear it a lot, especially in domestic violence victims. Well, I didn't remember him hitting me so much or beating me so much before. Like it seems like it just happened right now.
Yeah.
Because the amygdala will only access those traumatic memories when we're in a state of distress. So the
hmm
victim will only remember all of those other times that they were hurt while they're being hurt again. But when everything is calm, then it just kind of goes to the back of their mind of like, oh, everything is okay and we're fine and we keep going. The other thing that happens is we can dissociate. Dissociate means that our mind disconnects from our body and we're watching the event as if we're an outside spectator, right? What happens is
Yeah.
that when we're enduring a traumatic event that we can't physically run from or we can't hide, our mind is like, we need to escape this because we're in a lot of danger, we can possibly die, but we can't physically leave, so our mind takes us away so that we can deal with what's happening. Therefore it causes like missing memories, and it's hard to
Hmm.
recall the full event. The bad thing with dissociation is that we continue to use it over and over again. It just is something that happens without our permission. We can be triggered and dissociate, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah. Yeah.
gone. There's no control over it after you use it for so long.
Yeah, yeah. And it reminds me of a lot of these things are maladaptive, right? So it works when you're in the situation that is traumatic, but it becomes a problem once you're in a place where you're normally safe, typically safe, and you're having some of these physical, emotional, and mental reactions to where you're at presently.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
mhm,
So
mhm.
you could be in a restaurant having dinner with your
Yeah.
family, and somebody says something that triggered you. You can dissociate from that point, and it's kind of like you just dissociated. You can see what's going on, but you can't hear what people are telling you, and you can't process. So then you come back and you're like, "What happened? I missed the whole conversation." But you don't want to look like you're not all there mentally, so most people just stay quiet and they're just kind of like, "I don't know what just happened here."
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and then we also have blocking. Blocking is just blocking emotions. When we go through traumatic events, it can really mess with our emotional regulation system. So we don't want to feel uncomfortable all the time because we can get triggered at any point. So what we do is we start to block the emotions so we don't feel them. So the thing with blocking emotions is you can't block just the negative ones. You also block the positive ones. And in blocking the emotion, you can seem like you're always negative, or like you're a pessimistic person, or like you're always unhappy, but it's because you're just trying to block the uncomfortable emotions and in turn just blocking all of them altogether.
Absolutely. So what can a person do about trauma?
So they can definitely seek professional help to work through the trauma. Sometimes people have experienced trauma and they don't know that it was traumatic to them because it was very normal.
Mm.
So there may
Yeah,
have
so we
been
gotta
some.
like,
Yes, there may have been like some emotional abuse going on in the home, and it's like, well, that's just how we talk to each other. And it's like, no, that's not okay. That's emotional
yeah, yeah,
abuse, right? Or like, oh, well, every time I get in trouble, my mom hits me, but that's normal. That's just like my mom's response to it, right? So people normalize behaviors, even if they're not good behaviors or healthy behaviors. We normalize everything. So sometimes we don't realize that we were going through traumatic events until maybe somebody else points it out.
yeah. Mhm.
So once you do realize that you've been in a it's that have gone through trauma, you can definitely choose to seek professional help. Also look for support in your family or friends, or do a support group. Those are also very good too.
You mentioned something very poignant in terms of the realization of trauma, right? The normalization of trauma. So there's some guys that I work with, and I'll do my assessment with them, and then I'll ask them, "Have you experienced any trauma?" And some of them will think and just, no, like there's nothing. And by the point where it happens in my assessment, I've talked about their family, I've talked about the job that they've been in, relationships, growing up as a kid, and it'll be a number of different things that I would categorize and I see as trauma for these individuals, and to them, it's just another Tuesday. So in that moment, sometimes I take the moment and help them realize, hey, this area right here wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it can be problematic for you. And this is how it showed up. And this is where this kind of led to. So it becomes kind of like the Russian egg situation. So there's sometimes trauma within trauma within trauma with these individuals, but all they see is just the effects. Like, so they may be depressed, they may dissociate, they may have anger outbursts, they may have poor relationships, they may be going from job to job, overly aggressive, and a number of different other things, but really can't point to where some of that stuff is coming from.
Right.
So back to what we discussed before, the maladaptive behavior. So you're reacting in a way that doesn't fit with what's going on currently, and it's making an effect on areas of your life that don't require that sort of response from you.
Correct. It's all I people I think we forget that people we all develop coping skills as we're growing up
Yes.
and becoming adults.
Hmm.
We all have coping skills that we use, our go-tos, and even if
Yeah.
they're not healthy, they're still coping skills, right? So for
Yeah.
example,
Absolutely.
addiction is a coping skill. It's not a healthy one, but yet is a coping skill, right?
Yeah.
There's many different coping skills that people use. Emotional eating, right? Binge eating. It's not a healthy coping skill, but it's a coping skill. So it's those coping skills that helped us get through those difficult situations at that time that they
Hmm.
become so normal and familiar that we continue to use them over and over again.
Yeah. So why do you think like we're discussing trauma a lot more than in the past?
I think now everybody's has a lot more space to talk about it in their social media platforms, and I think it's become more of a normal thing. There's a question.
Yeah. So
Is
Fanny asked,
mhm.
does trauma ever go away or do we just learn to live with it? What would you say?
So the memories never go away. We can't delete our
It's stored.
memories. We can't delete our memories. um, but we can learn to deal with how we handle the emotional distress from those memories. So I can't do anything about the actual event, but I can work towards turning it into just something that happened in the past that no longer affects me moving forward. Because if I'm still letting that trauma affect me, it's going to affect how I handle relationships, friendships, my career, my professional life, all of those things. So it's not so much about forgetting the trauma, it's about remembering that it happened, but knowing that you no longer have to be in emotional distress or making impulsive decisions based from your trauma.
You know, you said a word right there, impulsive decisions, right?
Yep.
So you're reacting instead of responding to what's going on in the environment around you. I think that's an important thing to look into as well. So what are some protective factors when it comes to trauma?
Um, I think having a strong support system, or at least a support system that you feel is a strong support system, like friends, family, counselors, things like that. Sometimes
Mhm.
disclosing the trauma helps a lot. So if I'm just holding on to
Yeah.
my trauma, it's like if I just pick this up and I went everywhere with it, and I'm just carrying it with me everywhere. But if I say it little by little, I start to like dismantle it and get it off my chest and understand that I think the biggest protective factor would be understanding that it's okay to feel however you feel about the trauma.
Yeah,
There's no right or
absolutely.
wrong reaction.
Yeah, and then therapy, I think, allows that space to occur, right?
Mhm.
I don't know many people that want to sit there and like, oh yeah, tell me about what happened when, you were 14, and
Right,
then that might be too much for them, and then also they may not have the capacity to provide feedback that would actually be helpful. So we're not always therapists, right? So like
right,
even in our personal lives, we give some ratchet advice like, man, leave him, like, and don't really think things through, right? With our friends. So you can only imagine, with some of the support that you have and areas that you're in, those individuals may not understand how to really break down some of the challenges that come with the trauma that you're experiencing and talk about it in a way that is respectful of the situation and doesn't belittle the situation that that person has experienced.
Right. I think it's important to note that not everybody's going to, just because you say what you need, not everybody's going to meet your needs. So
Mm,
sometimes we just need to be very clear in, hey, I want to share this with you, and I just need you to be there as an emotional support, or just sit here with me and just listen to me.
just listen, yeah.
Right. Because I think when we really love someone and we care about them, our first instinct is to be like, well, who did it? Well, what can we do? Well, let's go to the police and let's do this. And we get all wound up about it, but maybe the person doesn't want any of that. They just want to be heard.
Yeah, they're not there yet.
Right.
Um, so Brianna asked, what are boundaries? How can we set them up, especially if trauma is with a family member? And this is a great topic. It goes into a question that we got that we're going to get into discussing familiar trauma and some of the stuff that comes with that.
Yeah.
So right now we're in April. Ooh, what was it, like 4 or 5 months ago? We're in the holiday season,
Yep.
right? So that means traveling and meeting family or having family come over, trying to spend time with family and things of that nature. And being in that environment can reignite some of the traumatic experiences for some people. So you have certain family dynamics and certain ways that, in terms of communication and other things that you're reminded of when you're with family. In terms of boundaries, you set them. You have to be assertive. You decide what your boundaries are when it comes to you. And no one gets to negotiate that with you. No is a complete answer. And I think a lot of us forget that, especially when it comes to our trauma. It is ours. It doesn't belong to mom. It doesn't belong to your brother. It is yours. So you don't have to go into a big explanation of why you're in a place where you don't feel comfortable with them. I would say learning why you don't feel comfortable with things, I think, further reinforces your no. So you don't have to second guess yourself when it comes to having these boundaries. The next thing is also knowing what it looks like when your boundaries are crossed. For me, and I'll speak on for me, there are times where something happens and it'll have to be someone else, and it's like that wasn't okay. And I'm just like, oh snap, like, yeah, you're right. Like that wasn't okay. And that is part of my boundary. I am not okay with that. But for whatever reason, in real life, how things go, the speed of certain things, you may let certain things slide. So the next thing in terms of boundaries I would say is recognizing what those boundary crossings are when your boundaries are being crossed and being immediate about it. So, as much as you can. So, it can be difficult to call the person out right then and there. It may not be the time or the place for it, but don't let it go too far because our memories only work so far. We only have so much of a limit in terms of our memory. So you might bring something up, and it's like, why are you bringing up something from December?
Correct.
We're in April.
Mm-hmm.
So just be prepared for discussions like that. There's no wrong way, but I think uh, when you can do it at almost as immediately as possible, the better results that you'll get in terms of your boundaries. And don't be afraid to remind people, remind people, remind people. And if it's to the point where that person blatantly disrespects your boundaries, you may need to think about the choices in which you allow yourself to be present in that person's life or that person to be a present in your life to some extent. And that's very difficult because it's what we're used to an extent. And familial trauma, it's very complicated, right, Yomar?
It is very complicated. I think you have to go back to how did you learn to set them, right? Sometimes we just didn't learn to set boundaries. So if we don't know how to do something, then how are we going to do it? Another thing
Mm,
is that maybe we didn't learn to, um, the biggest factor maybe is fear, right? So sometimes, to be honest, the most common factor in in setting boundaries is that, or what doesn't allow us to, is that we get scared. We're scared that if we set that boundary, that's going to mess up the relationship, right?
Yes. Yep. We still here. Still live in effect. We ain't lose you.
So first, we, like you said, we have. I don't know what's going on right now. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I hope you pay Comcast.
I
Stop
know.
playing with them people.
Spectre,
Pay
isn't that
them
my
what you
tone?
owe.
Okay, for real. So,
Oh, man.
um, well, okay. So, like I was saying, first we need to know: did we learn to set boundaries? Sometimes we don't know how to. We didn't learn, so we don't know how. We
Mm-hmm.
we may have learned that when we tried to set boundaries, someone constantly violated them, right? So if people are constantly violating our boundaries, what we learn to do again is that amygdala, right? Our amygdala is in the back of our brain, and it teaches us, amygdala saves associations. So if every time I try to set a boundary, I receive a negative response, my amygdala is going to associate setting boundaries with a negative response, which is in turn is going to instill fear in me, which is what makes it the most difficult for people to set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm really afraid that if I set a boundary, I'm going to get hurt, and it doesn't have to be physically hurt, it could be emotionally, or the person's going to
Yeah.
have a really bad reaction, I'm not going to want to do that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Until we realize, wait a minute, is this fear rational or irrational? Right? And when you realize that the fear is irrational, it's okay to set the boundaries, and it's okay to say no without feeling guilty. But you have to know that it's okay to say no and express your wants and your needs without feeling guilty. And that
Yeah.
if the person violates your boundaries again, you have the power to walk away. Or a lot of people are afraid of sounding like a broken record. Well, I already told this person not to do that, and they continue to do it. Well, you have to continue to repeat yourself. I always make the analogy of like training puppies. When
Yeah,
when you're training
that's
a puppy, um, it's difficult, and it's a lot of repetition. If you want the puppy to go outside, you have to go every 2 hours, every 2 hours, every 2 hours, every 2 hours, and you have to continue. And Brianna is right. It is very hard, but you have a choice. You have to realize, okay, if I'm
mm-hmm.
operating from a fear-based perspective, and fear is putting me in the corner, I have a choice. I can either let the fear block me and I can't see nothing, and so therefore I have tunnel vision and I can't do anything, right? So I'm just gonna take whatever crap's being dumped on me, or I'm gonna avoid it altogether. Or
Yeah.
I can look past it a little bit, see what's going on, or I can carry my fear and take it with me. Or you can punch it in the face.
Absolutely.
Whatever you want to do is your fear, right?
Yeah.
So it's the person, people are going to continue to react how they've been reacting to you. If it's a family member, for example, was the question
Mm-hmm.
that Brianna was asking. If it's a family
Yep.
member and they continue to react in the same way, you have to give them the same consequence every time your boundary is violated, until they make the connection like, okay, if I continue to treat this person this way, they're going to continue to do this, so maybe I should stop. And
Yeah.
if the person doesn't, then you have to be that stop. And if you need some distance, then you need some distance to gather yourself and then come back to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It is okay to say no. Yes. But most people feel that, well, it's going to ruin the friendship. It's going to ruin the relationship. People are not going to like me if I say no. Right. That's one end of the spectrum. Then you have another end, which is, I don't respect anybody's boundaries, but I want everybody to respect mine.
Yeah.
So
That's one-sided.
exactly.
Relationships are a give and take.
Boundaries are not meant to be manipulative. They're not meant to be walls. People should think of boundaries as a way to teach others how to treat us, right? So if we just met, I know that I have to be polite to you and things like that, but if you don't teach me how to treat you, then how will I know?
Yeah.
And I think people are afraid of being vulnerable, because when we set boundaries, boundaries have to align with our values, and it's a way to let us hold other people accountable and ourselves. So
Mm-hmm. You said that. You said that B word, man. People don't like to hear that. Vulnerability. I'm good on
Vulnerability is a
that.
big no-no, but we can't get what we want and what we need if we don't express that. If what I
Facts.
need is space, I need to tell you that that's what I need.
Hmm.
And if I need space because I'm feeling hurt or afraid, I need to tell you that so you know.
And that's on NASA. We need some space. We got it.
Sometimes you need that NASA space. Enough from here to the moon.
Yeah. So
When
one of
you're
the things
setting
that
that boundary.
you mentioned was just like people, you have to remind them over and over. The systems in our family once they want to keep a certain equilibrium, right? This is what we're used to. This is what it needs to be. This is what it has been and always needs to be. So being aware of that, like, oh, this is what I'm not a little kid anymore, right? I'm an adult or whatever. This was that, and this is this now. And I'm not going back to what it was. And this is the new way that we're going to be doing things moving forward, and maintain that. And that becomes the new
The new
equilibrium,
norm.
status quo. Yeah,
Yeah.
the norm.
Yes. I think a lot of people are afraid that if they change something, the biggest fear is if I don't do this anymore, what do I do? So I can say no now, but now remember, boundaries about holding yourself and other people accountable. And sometimes it's hard to hold ourselves accountable when we've been stuck in this role our whole lives. So maybe if I
Mm-hmm.
put a boundary here, it won't validate my belief about myself anymore, right? So if you constantly are yelling at me and insulting me, and I say no, don't do that, I don't like it, and I give you a consequence when you violate it, now what's going to be my evidence to prove that I'm not good enough, to prove that I am a victim of this abuse? Now I have to actually not just set the boundary, but kind of walk the walk, like, okay, I can handle myself. And when I feel like I can't, I'm like, well, now I can't point the finger at somebody,
Yeah,
if that makes
yeah.
sense.
You're retaking your power
Correct.
in the situation. Yeah. So Brianna said, "Is there a practice technique for setting boundaries?" They want all the sauce, don't they? So have a son and say, "Boys, after this." No, I'm
They
joking.
food is bland, they
Uh,
gotta season it.
Sasson, a little sasson. Uh, One thing that I like to do with my clients is discuss positive affirmation. So it goes back to what Yomar was saying. If you know your worth, then it makes it a little bit difficult for people to disrespect your boundaries. So it could be something like a mantra. It could be five different things. It could be four different things that you can point to. Hey, I am worthy. I am loved. I am important. I require safety, whatever it might be for you, that reminds you each and every single day before you step out and interact with people who may step on your boundaries, that you're holding yourself to those standards. So you hold yourself to those standards, so therefore other people are going to have to learn to respect those boundaries that you have for yourself. So that's just a little 5 cent tip right there.
Yes. I like that. And I also, for me, I call it the Bill of Rights. I do a Bill of Rights with my clients, right? I go through why it's important
That's a
to
good
have
one.
boundaries, what they are and what they're not, the types of different boundaries. And then we actually write out a list of boundaries. Because the biggest thing that I find with my clients, at least, is that they're very confused. They don't know what is okay to say no to, and they don't know what is okay to say yes to. So in identifying that confusion and clearing it up, it makes it easier for them to be like, oh, it's okay to say no if somebody's being passive aggressive. Okay, I can call them out. You can. You just have to be assertive. So with boundaries, it's not just a one thing solves it all. With boundaries comes
Mhm.
what are your values? Because if you value honesty and you're lying, you're gonna feel guilty. That's why a lot of people
Mhm.
avoid setting the boundary, because sometimes they feel like I have to hold myself responsible for this boundary. But if I don't set it, I'm gonna feel like I'm lying and I'm gonna feel guilty. And now I start to associate setting boundaries with something negative. Then I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So
So you get to a place of being more congruent, right? Which is being balanced with what you're saying and what you're doing,
agree.
right?
Yeah.
So I have that expectation of myself, so therefore I can have that expectation of other people, if I understand correctly.
Correct. Right. And so if you know what you value, and you know that, like you said, your worth. If I feel like I deserve crumbs, I'm gonna give myself crumbs. But if I feel like I deserve more, then I'm going to make sure that people treat me like I'm worth $1 million, right? But
Yeah.
in that same sense, it can be very confusing for people to know how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
set boundaries,
So,
you're doing that.
so how does shame and guilt interact with trauma?
Ooh, okay. So I always ask people, do you know what the difference between guilt and shame is? Because
Hmm.
most people don't. So guilt is I did something bad, right? Like, oh, I smacked my mom's favorite vase and it fell and it broke. I did something bad. Sorry. Shame is, oh my God, I did something bad, so I'm a bad person, right? So I broke my mom's vase on accident, her favorite vase. I'm so stupid. I knew I shouldn't have done that. What was I thinking? I should have never stood there. I should have never came to my mom's house. This was a horrible idea. I'm the worst. Da, 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 da. Right? So,
Yeah. Mhm.
so we start to beat ourselves up because we feel so much shame, right? Guilt is
Mhm.
not bad to have, and a certain degree of shame is not bad. Is when it becomes toxic shame that doesn't let us say like, man, I broke that vase and it was my fault, and I did a bad thing, but I can repay you. Just let me know and I'll make it up, right? Because the shame can be so big that it blocks us from actually holding ourselves accountable and from knowing what our role is in the whatever experience that we're going through or whatever that we're dealing with.
Oh, that's beautiful. I couldn't say any more any better than that. I love it. I love it. I love it. So how does trauma affect relationships with people? What would you say?
Well, it causes a huge impact because if in my traumatic experience I learned to, I can only depend on myself. I only have myself to depend on, nobody
Mm,
else. I can't trust it.
yeah.
I don't know who to trust. I don't know if I can trust myself or other people. I don't feel safe and I don't feel protected. So if I don't know how to protect myself and how to keep myself safe, I'm depending on you to do it. And the moment that you don't do it, that's going to scare me. And then I may either become angry and have anger outbursts because I don't know what's going on. I don't know that I need to feel protected. I don't know that I need to feel safe. I don't know that what's happening is that I don't trust myself because I thought I could trust you, but you're not meeting my needs. Therefore, this is a disaster. This was a bad idea. I should have never interacted with you and I hate you. And then once that emotional wave crashes and we're like, we take a step back and we start to breathe and we're like, what just happened there? I don't even know why I got mad at that person.
Yeah, right?
I think I just cussed my husband out. I don't know. I don't even know why. So it can affect in a very negative way because we're not sure when we go through traumatic experiences, there's a need that needed to be met that wasn't met. And then because
Yes.
we don't know how to meet those needs, we're hoping that the other person can meet it for us. And when they don't, because it's not their responsibility, we get upset or we get hurt or we avoid or we feel helpless. And so we have really, it's like a blinder. It's like it blinds us from knowing what the actual issue is so that we can resolve it. And then it builds unresolved conflict and then it builds distance and then you have a lot of issues.
You don't want those problems.
Yeah,
Um,
and then we're in our space.
so, what was I gonna say? There's something that when it comes to trauma, I just remembered how there's an expectation of what reality should be, right? So your caretakers, your spouse, or whoever, they are supposed to fulfill certain things. They're supposed to have a certain role. And when those roles are not fulfilled in the way, so like for the example, as a caretaker, you're supposed to ensure safety, security, help bringing in the upping the self-esteem and things of that nature. And when that isn't met, we can have an area where trauma can be set in, because we're not having our needs met, because the reality of what you're supposed to be and the role you're supposed to fulfill isn't happening, and it's quite the opposite in some cases,
Right.
which really throws people off.
Correct. Correct. If throughout each, there's various stages in life, and throughout each stage, we're supposed to have our needs met. The need to be able to trust, the need to be able to identify and find our role and our purpose in life. And during those developmental stages, if those needs are met, then we find ways to meet them. Again, we go back to
Mm,
those coping mechanisms that are not very healthy. So we can depend on someone else to say what our worth is, right? If we're talking about
yeah.
worth, or if I'm afraid of being alone because I believe that being alone is a negative thing. And now I just latch on to whoever that's willing to provide me some company. And I stay in this relationship or this interaction, even though it's not healthy for me. And I continue to go. And so I start to base my worth on external things. The problem with that is that we can become codependent on relationships. We can become codependent on substances. We can become codependent on our work. If I feel like my best worth is at work and you get fired, you're going to be in a world of trouble because I can't do the one thing that I thought I was good at, the only thing. Right? So that creates a lot of issues for people because now they're feeling worthless, hopeless, helpless, and because they don't have that thing that they're codependent upon.
Mm-mm-mm. So, can you experience trauma from toxic relationships?
You can. Let me back that up a little bit. So we
Not too
usually
much now.
beep, beep, beep. Okay. So we usually don't engage in toxic relationships unless
Yeah.
it's been our normal at some point in our lives. So I'm going to say it again so that people can hear it. We
Slow it down one time.
don't we don't usually engage in toxic relationships unless it's been a norm in one point of our lives. Either we grew up in toxic relationships around us, either we saw it, either we were part of it, either we were somewhere where that's what we learned that was okay. And because we learned that this was okay, we engaged into what's familiar. Remember that we are always going to normalize things, and we're
Yeah.
always going to go for what's familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're in a toxic relationship, it can intensify the trauma that we already brought into the relationship.
For sure, for sure. Gene, I have your questions. I'm gonna leave that towards the end. Um, Definitely like the questions that you sent. So yeah, these relationships, they sometimes don't stay within that one relationship, right?
Right.
So, to some extent, you might have an ex that you were dealing with and it was toxic and it ended, and then you go into another relationship and you kind of take that baggage along with you, and you may not be exposed to the same sort of toxic relationship, romantic toxic relationship, but you're still reacting in that way, and it goes back into that maladaptive behavior.
Yep.
So I've worked with individuals and it's like, hey, like my wife or my significant other is checking my phone. They're stalking me. They're showing up my job for no one. I mean, they're checking going to my job without notifying me and doing all these things and checking certain things. And it's like, where is this coming from? Is it me? And in some cases, it's not. It's just something that the person had to do to be able to survive that relationship that they were in. We're always in a constant state of coping, that you were mentioning.
Right. So I like to tell people, at least my clients, think of it as like we're born not knowing about depression, anxiety, trauma,
Mhm.
right? We're born just knowing that we're hungry, we need to get fed, We need our diapers changed, and we need someone to provide comfort to us when we're afraid, right? So,
Yes.
um, when as we're getting older, we learn what a toxic relationship is, not directly, but from our environment. It could be our households, our communities, our churches, our school relationships, whatever it is. We learn to either put up with a lot of things or we don't want to put up with anything. So we're not going to respect anybody's opinions or boundaries, and we're going to attack
Mhm.
anyone who may remind us of our abuser. We don't call them
Yeah.
abusers, we call them whatever role they're played in our lives. So as we get older, we start to normalize, you know what? This is my role in life, is to be the protector. So I'm going to protect
Mhm.
everyone. And then what that happens is, we, instead of being a protector, we become
Mhm.
enablers. Because in trying to protect people that are grown, we enable their behaviors, and then in turn that validates our role in the relationship of, well, I give them everything or I do everything for this person, and so they should do more for me. But you have a
Yeah.
decision to make, and with every decision you make, there's a consequence whether you like it or not. So you
Yeah.
have to identify what your role is in that relationship so that you can either change it or try something
Mhm.
different. Because if what you're doing is not working, then you have to change it, right?
Yeah. You keep doing the same thing, right? It's the definition of insanity. We're not about that, right?
Right. Doing the same
Good.
thing over and over again with expecting different results.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we start to build a bag as we get older. We start to carry a bag and we start to put things in it. And we take things out of that bag that we're going to use throughout, and that's that baggage that we carry into other relationships. We can carry baggage into a brand new relationship because it's a baggage that we have from our families, from our interactions with friends, with our leaders, with whoever, and then we take that into the new relationship, expecting for the other person to fulfill the same role that other people have fulfilled in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So someone mentioned toxic people tend to be very manipulative. In some cases, they may not even realize that they're being toxic, and it goes back into the coping skills that we discussed before, right? So they
Mm-hmm.
were taught in a certain way, this works. This is meeting the needs that I have. In the environment that I'm in, I need to do these things in order to gain whatever it might be. So in some cases, it may be control, because a lack of control means this, and I don't feel comfortable with the lack of control. So I engage in this particular behavior. And it may not be
Conscious. Yeah.
a thought, a conscious thought where you're just going systematically, like, yes, I'm going to say this and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And it's just, they just find themselves doing these things almost as normal as you breathing
It
in some
becomes,
way.
I think it becomes normal for both parties. So quick example, right? So say if I I'm always in need of money, and
Hmm.
my role in the interaction is, I'm not going to ask for money, but I'm going to manipulate you into giving me money. Which is, oh my God, I'm so broke. Like, I don't have any money. My light's about to be cut off. I don't have no internet. Like, I have no clothes. All my underwear have holes in them. Like, it's really embarrassing, right? And so I tell you all these things, and you feel
Hmm.
bad and you give me money.
Mm.
So I can be as manipulative as I want, but if you don't give me what I'm asking for, passive aggressively, then there is no manipulation. The problem is that people make the choice to meet the manipulator's needs and then blame it on the manipulator, instead of looking internally and being like, why do I keep giving this person money over and over again when I know they're not going to pay me back?
Yeah.
And then you're
Mhm.
super broke. You don't have any money because you've been giving it to this person. But you have to look internally and know that you decided to meet that person's needs. Now, are there times that it's not that obvious that we're meeting someone's needs and enabling them? Yes, but it's up to each individually to be accountable for their own decisions and the consequences that those decisions bring.
Ooh, Brianna said self accountability. Ooh, bars.
Sasson, again.
The song, the song. We'll get in trouble with the Goya people. We keep this up, right?
We're gonna get canceled.
Too much, too much. Oh man. We discussed a lot of different topics and a lot of different things that are going on within trauma. So, what would you say is like the biggest takeaway? If you could maybe pinpoint it to like one particular thing or one kind of particular topic situation, what would you say you want people to take away from this Instagram live?
Oof. Oh gosh, so much. Okay, I'll try to break it down. Um, I tend to wrap.
It's hard.
I know it's so hard. Okay, so I think people need to take away learning to set boundaries, learning to hold yourself accountable. Just because you know that you went through a traumatic event doesn't mean that that's the reason why you continue to make crappy decisions moving forward. The point is to make the connections to know what led you to understand and react in this way so that you can make a difference moving forward, not so that you can have an excuse to not set boundaries, to not say no, to enable others' behaviors, to continue to put yourself in these situations that make you, that kind of validate that negative self-defense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that's the most important.
Yo, hey, people are asking for a part two.
This girl, she's been sending hearts and saying I'm her favorite counselor. She's so sweet.
Yeah. So definitely, I think that would be a great idea for us to run it back and discuss certain things. There's definitely some topics that we didn't get into.
Yeah.
For example, like the treatment modalities, digging a
Vicarious.
little bit more.
Right.
Yeah, vicarious
Trauma
trauma
bonding. Yeah,
bonding,
that's important too.
and things of that nature. So I would love to get into that. So the biggest takeaway, if I can kind of sum it up, I want people who are able to watch this Instagram live is to understand that we're always being exposed to different traumas throughout our life, right? Just living in our experience in this living body, we're exposed to trauma all of the time. And it just came out of, and we're still to some degree dealing with the trauma of the pandemic, which I think we should discuss next time,
Yeah.
right? So it affects us in different ways, it comes out in different ways, and it does things to us in different ways. So the awareness of it within ourselves and then also in others so we can be supportive to people who have experienced trauma. Even though we might not understand it one for one, we do our best to be supportive, as you discussed previously, Yolmar.
Right.
So we're all trying to figure it out. But we don't have to remain stuck in the experiences that may have caused adverse reactions in us in involving trauma.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
And then I have two bonus questions for you.
Okay.
From Jane, right?
This Dean guy asks a lot of questions.
No. Be nice. Be nice. How do you set up counseling goals?
Oh, that's a good one. This Gene guy is really smart with his questions. So how do you set up counseling goals? I think you have a general idea of what you want to work on. And that's why it's good at the beginning to discuss these goals that you have in mind with your counselor. So your counselor knows what you want to work on. But as you guys discuss things, your counselor can also make goals for you and then share those for you and say, I've identified that we also need to work on, boundaries or anxiety or this and that. What do you think? And then you both kind of come to an agreement on the goals that you want to work on and the counselor thinks that you want to work on.
Yeah. So it's a collaborative effort that starts at the beginning of counseling. It's not something that's done in the middle, not at the end. It's a roadmap to what we're going to be working on and what you're interested in. So one thing that I remind clients, like, I can't decide what your counseling goals are. I
Correct.
can maybe have some input. I can
Correct.
work on it with you, but you're the driver. I'm the passenger in the front seat. I don't
Right.
want to be a backseat driver. So I'm right there with you. I got my little Google Maps, and it's like, oh, turn right. Okay, I think that's the right we need to make. So it's a situation where we're both working on this, but
Correct.
it's mostly in the hands of the person receiving counseling.
Yes, I
Uh,
agree with that.
the
Just one caveat to that.
uh,
um, I think it's important to note that counseling is a tool, a guide. Your counselor is a guide for you to get to where you want to go because it's your
yeah,
future and everybody's the expert in their own lives. So we're just here to guide people. We're not life coaches. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we can definitely guide you in the right direction.
man, I wish you could say that twice. Uh, what do I do now? You tell me what you need to do now, right?
What do you
Like,
think that is?
oh man,
Let's go
we're
back to
just
the drawing
joking.
board. Connecting the dots 101. Come on now.
That's yes. Chris asked, what if one of the client's goal is not realistic? How do you get them to see that? That's a toughie.
That was funny.
That's a,
So
that's a toughie.
I think you have to meet the client where they're at. Least that's my philosophy in
Mm,
counseling. Even if the client's goal is you think it's not realistic, you still want to know what is leading the client to want to reach that goal, right? So it's not, it maybe it's not that it's unrealistic, but maybe it's that they need a roadmap to know where they can get to. And so you try to make the connections with them and help them realize, where do you actually want to be? Are you in fantasy land or are you being more realistic? And if you're in fantasy, you just have to bring them back down slowly.
yeah. Don't crush their dreams all at once, right?
Right.
No, that's not what we do here. Yeah, I definitely concur with that. It is something that we look at. What do you have currently going on? What are your resources? And breaking them into smaller pieces. So a person could be like, I want to be very rich. I want to be a millionaire. And it's like, okay, what does that look like? What is it about being a millionaire that you want to accomplish? And we can maybe bring some of those things to that person's life without them needing to become a millionaire to some extent. So maybe they want more control, they want more agency, they want more financial freedom. So we can break those goals down into something that is attainable for that person in a time that they can see it happening for them. So nothing worse than having a goal and not seeing you make progress towards that set goal. Um, so the last question we have is
Is it Gene again?
the strengths. This was from Gene. The strengths and limitations as therapists. So I'll answer this one.
Go for it.
So my strengths is working with adult males between the ages of 20 and 25. Even I wouldn't call it old, but even 45 is my range. I feel comfortable. I can relate to those individuals. I understand where those individuals are coming from, and we speak a very similar language. My limitations as a therapist is working with younger children. Yolmar smiling because we talk about this all the time. Uh, I don't have all the Fortnite dances together. I don't. It's hard to remember not being asked out to the prom or not having a prom date, pimples, and some other things. I'm joking. Um, but those are some of my strengths and limitations as a therapist.
Yep. I think it's important for all therapists to know what their strengths and their limitations is as far as what populations they prefer to work with, what a little
I'm
bit
not hip. This
he's a
guy.
little bit what limitations, what populations, what's your niche, what kind of things interest you, what comes to you, and then also knowing how many clients do you want, are you able to see a day before you burnout, fatigue, all of that is really important to know when you know your limitations as a therapist so that you don't have burnout of empathy or just like needing a vacation or just being overwhelmed with everybody's problems. So
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Uh, so where can the people find you, Yolmar?
So I do have my own counseling company, all through telehealth. It's called Perceived Truths. It's you can find me online through Perceived Truth Services and Counseling.com. You can find me on Psychology Today. Um, I'm on ZocDoc as well, and then or you can find my profile on Instagram. Don't judge when you look at the profile. It's real.
It's real. She's working on it. We're
It's a
gonna have
work in
content, right?
progress. But yeah, the name of my company is Perceived Truths. I do trauma counseling, I do immigration evaluations, and I do alcohol and drug evaluations and mental health evaluations as well.
All right, awesome, awesome. And I have been Ulrick J. Accime. You can find me at kaiwellnesscenter.com. Email info at Kai Wellness Center, Instagram Kai Wellness Center, Facebook Kai Wellness. There's a pattern here, right?
Sky Wellness Center.
Kai Wellness Center, right? That's good branding for you.
Correct.
YouTube, I have a YouTube, Kai Wellness Center. Like, like who would have thought? Who would have thought? Don't post on there very often, but I do have a couple things on YouTube. So I have different events that I've been on and Instagram lives and things of that nature. So feel free to take a look at some of the content that I have on there. And then I had one more question before I let you go. Oh, are you accepting clients, Yomar?
I am accepting new clients. Like I said, you guys can reach me through my website, Perceived Truth Services and Counseling.com, through my Instagram profile, or you can email me at info@perceivedtruths.com. I see clients on the weekends and evenings. So if that works for you and you guys are interested in getting some help, you can definitely reach out.
Um, as far as for me, my caseload is full. It's a blessing. I'm so happy to be working with the individuals that I have been working with. We have a long journey ahead of us, and I hope people don't take that the wrong way. Oh, I'm just very blessed. I'm thankful. All right. Thank you so much, Yomar, for enlightening the people about trauma. And we got to definitely talk about doing a part two.
Yes, I'm definitely down. This was my very first one and I really liked it. So thank you for pushing me to do it because my fear was telling me all these things and I was like, should I punch the fear in the face or should I just let it overcome me? So I thank you for giving me
Yeah.
this opportunity and I really liked it. It was really fun.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Speak to you all soon.